Okay, so we're back. It's lesson 4. We've set up our local instance of the Everything Store. We've got a bunch of stuff we still want to accomplish today. So the first thing we need to do is get our web application talking to the database. So I opened up the Everything Store in Visual Studio. I launched it through the Start Without Debugging. And that takes us to our homepage we created last week. We added the Boots Watch theme. So we're basically going to be able to do this without writing any code. Okay. So how do we connect this in Visual Studio? And then I will go through an example of also setting it up by connecting to a database on Azure as well. Then we'll also look at publishing the website. We want to try and accomplish all those things. Okay. So what I'm going to do is right click on my web project. So again, notice under my solution, it says 2 projects. So the main one that's in bold, that's our web project. And then down below, there's our unit test project, which we're not really worried about right now. So I want to right click the web project up at the top. And I'm going to choose add a new item. So from your web project, add new item. So it defaults into the web template for views and things like that. We don't want that. I'm actually going to click up here under Visual C# under the Data tab. You can see on the left under Visual C# and Data. What I want is this very first option that says ADO.NET Entity Data Model. So ADO is a very old, like 2 decades old Microsoft Data Access Library. So I'm just going to call this one DB model. So this is going to create a database connection class. In a minute, we're going to get prompted to provide information about the database we want to connect to. And then Visual Studio will automatically generate that connection in the web.config, that question from our quiz. You can call it anything you want. I'll just call it DB model. It's kind of descriptive, and I'll click add. So some of you will have a screen that's a little different from this one, depending on the versioning of your Visual Studio. So it basically says, okay, you want to create a database connection. How do you want to do this? Do you already have a bunch of model classes in here and you want to generate new tables in a database? That's called the code first model or the model first. Or do we want to pick, we already have tables in the database and we want to generate business model. We want to generate model classes based on those tables. So that's what we want. So I want this option. Create a code first model based on an existing database. You can choose the connection settings and which database objects we want to include. So I'm going to pick that one. You may have different options. There may be an option that just says, database first. If you have those options, slightly different text, you want the database first option because we already have the tables. So I'm going to pick code first from database. Now you don't get this screen quite yet, so hang on. You probably get a screen. You may get a window that looks like this that says choose data source. Yes, no? Did you get this window? Whoops. So it's like this one. Okay, it's all right. Yours is empty. I've created connections in the past. So you're going to click on new connection. Right? It's pointing to a database that Visual Studios I've already connected to. So you click new. Now you may not have this screen. You may have this window first, right? So it's asking what kind of database do you want to connect to? The reason I don't get this is because I've previously picked Microsoft SQL Server and I've checked always. So now when I add new connections, it automatically defaults to SQL Server. It doesn't ask me what type. So if I wanted to connect to something else, I would then go and choose the data source. So pick Microsoft SQL Server. So this will work for 2005 and above. That's good. It's 14 years backwards compatible. And choose always. So then if we add new connections, so in your assignment, when you create a connection to your assignment database, it won't ask you what type of database is it. It just knows we're working with SQL Server. So just check that box. click OK. And then it asks, first of all, for the server name. So I can either type my computer name here, or I can click the drop down, which probably wasn't a very good idea because it's kind of slow. Because I have lots of connections. Let's try this. If it doesn't show up, I'm just going to go and copy my server name from Management Studio in here. Okay. So I'm going to go back to Management Studio. Here's my server name. So I'll just copy the name. This would be your computer name. Now, you can probably leave the authentication as Windows. And if you connected in Management Studio without a username and password, you don't need a username and password here. We're using the same authentication. I'm going to have to change my authentication. I'll put save so it won't keep prompting me. And then it wants to know what database are we connecting to. If I start typing, it automatically connects me and notice it auto-completes. And then if I want to test this, I'll just click this test connection button down here. Cool. So Visual Studio can now see my Everything Store database and talk to it. So you won't have to change the authentication. You should just be able to use Windows authentication. I set my server up to require username and password instead. Yep, it's okay if you have to. It should autofill though. Check test, click test connection and see if it connects. You may have an issue. If it's not autofilling, there may be a challenge with the connection. So now I'll just click OK. I will go through this process by connecting to Azure as well in a minute. I'll connect to both. Okay. Oh crap! Actually, you know what? There's one thing I forgot to do. I'm going to cancel out of this, and we'll do it. I'm going to walk through it again. There was one small step. I can do it later, but it's actually going to be easier if I do it first, which is okay because I'll get to walk you through the process one more time. So I'm actually going to cancel. We have to do one thing. I'm going to close up all of my documents. And I'm going to go and open up the web.config file. So it's the very last file in the web project, right above the Everything Store test project. I'm going to open that. And when we're done that process, Visual Studio is going to generate a connection string in our database, in our web.config. Notice we already have one here. It just points to a local file name from the date and time we set our project up. I want to get rid of this, and here's why. So this is line 14 of my web.config. This is an auto-generated file. We'll be here. We haven't had to do anything to create it. So this connection string is given a name of default connection. This is kind of a keyword. We want our connection string to our SQL Server to be called default connection. If we have this one called default connection, we can't create another one with the same name. There's a reason why calling it default connection is important. It's not important yet, but in a few weeks when we start adding security to our application, Microsoft gives us a whole massive pile of libraries for doing user authentication and roles and permissions. Those libraries all are hard-coded to use a connection string called default connection. So if you call this, our database connection, my database, those libraries, none of them work. So all the pre-built code for doing registration, login, checking roles and permissions, none of it will work. So before we create our own connection string called default connection, we need to either rename or better yet, we need to delete these two lines out of here because we're going to replace them with our new connection that's going to also be called default. So in my code, I'm going to highlight lines 14 and 15 and take them out. And then I'll go through, start that little wizard up again. Okay, I should have done this first. I'm going to take those out and save it. So there are no database connections in the project right now. So you've got this empty connection string section with nothing in it. So typically we want to do that first. So now I'll go through the process again. I'm going to add. Now I can go through new item, but this context menu, it all actually shows you the item types of items you've added most recently. So because I've added this before, it actually shows up in the context menu. If you don't have it, you just go back to new item, data, pick ADO.NET Entity Data Model. And again, I'll call it DB model, no spaces. Never want to put spaces in our file names. We don't have to give it a .cs extension. It will automatically get that extension. So this is going to be a database connection object. I'll click add. Again, I'll pick code first from database. I'll go back and click new connection again because I'm going to finish this process. Then there's also a web.config in the root of the views folder. It's got to be right in the root of the project. So I'll try again. So it takes me back to this window and it shows this is what our connection string is going to look like. It's got my server name, my database. It says initial catalog. That's the name of the database we're connecting to. It has my username and it's hiding my password. And it's asking, do we want to include the password in the connection string? I'm going to say yes for simplicity. You guys don't have to worry about it if you're using Windows authentication because you don't have a password. So I'll click yes. And then it says, save this in web.config as, and this is where we want to change this to that keyword default connection. Again, it doesn't matter for now, but it's going to matter in a couple of weeks. So our connection class will be called DB model, but the actual connection string in web.config needs to be called default connection. No spaces. Make sure you type that out. So choose yes and name it default connection. Next. So now it's saying which objects from the database do you want? So if I expand tables, this is my default user account, DBO. Microsoft SQL Server automatically creates a user account called DBO, stands for database owner. So we have full permissions. This user has full permissions in this database. And if I expand, right, it sees the tables. So what tables do we want? Carts, categories. We don't really need countries for now. Order details, orders, and products. You can ignore the diagrams. You can ignore the countries. So we want Visual Studio to generate a class based on each of these 5 tables. And each class will have a property that's mapped to all of the columns in the table. Amelia, you had a question? Oh, okay. If you pick Windows authentication, you may not have that option about including sensitive information. It's because it's just using your Windows account and there is no password. So that may have been grayed out for you. It's enabled for me because I have a username and password. So pick these 5 tables. If you pick them all, that's fine, but we don't need countries or sys diagrams. And then I'll keep this box checked, pluralize or singularize object names. That means if we have a products table, plural, the model will be called product singular. We have carts, plural, the model class will be called cart singular. So I'll click finish. So this is going to chug away. It's going to generate a few files, and then it prompts me. It says, you have web.config open, but Visual Studio has made changes to the file because it wrote the default connection in. Do you want to save and reload the file with the changes? So I'm going to say yes to this. I'll say yes or yes to all, doesn't matter. So now in my web.config, in that blank space, I now have my database connection. So it's added line 13 for me. The other thing we'll notice, a bunch of references got added here. We got references to this library called Entity Framework. This is Microsoft's data access library for talking to SQL Server, kind of the equivalent of the PDO library in PHP. It's the interface between our front-end application and SQL Server. So we've got references to Entity Framework. And now if we look at models, oh crap, I did this in the wrong place. We created that model in the root of our project. That was not very smart of me. So here's our DB model. Here's our database connection class. It inherits from the DB context class, meaning it's a database connection object. It uses our connection string called default connection. And then it references our carts, categories, orders. And it also keeps track of the relationships. So for example, one category has many products. One product has many. So all of those relationships in the database are mapped to our model. And then we have all our model classes. We're going to have to move them because they're supposed to go in the models folder. So I created this in the root. I meant to create it inside my models folder. So here's our, for example, here's our product class. So it has a few references here. So every product can be in multiple carts. Every product can be on multiple order details. And then it lays out the properties that match the columns in the database. Same data types, same validation rules, right? Photos, 255 characters, etc. So it auto-generates our models based on our database. So they're mapped. Now I do need to move these. So I can either walk through that whole process one more time, or I can just drag each file into the models folder. I'll maybe drag my cart into models and see what happens. Okay. I'm going to delete them and run it one more time. If I have to go through the process the third time, not the worst thing in the world because it's new for everybody. I'm okay. Okay, so I'm going to delete my cart model. I'm going to delete my category model, my database model. Sorry. It will be easier if I just do it right. Order, order detail, and product. My database connection string is fine. When we set it up this time, I'll say, no, don't create a database connection string. I've already done that part. So this time, not very smart. I'm going to right click on my models folder because I want to do this inside of models. I'm going to add a model, DB model. Maybe third time will be a charm. Code first from database. Which string? Use my default connection. It's already set up. I'll uncheck this. I don't need it to save the connection string. It already saved the connection string. It's already done. Mind you, why can't I click next? Sorry, I'll just check that. Click next. I'll add my tables again, carts, categories, orders, order details, products, and I'll finish. Yep, if you want to add country, it's certainly not going to break anything. So now it adds them, but notice it adds them all inside of models where they're supposed to go. So here's my database connection class. I need to change line 11 because it wants the name of the connection string it's going to use. So this has got to be changed to default. I'd done it right the first time, it would already say default connection. So now here are our models. And they're namespaced inside of the model's namespace. The other thing I could have done is drag the files and then rename the namespace in all of them. Okay. So now we built this simple list of products last week. So I'm going to build my solution now. We'll just make sure it still loads. Nothing should be broken. It does build. If I go to products, we won't really see anything. But our product page from last week with our 10 fake products, it should still load. Makes it slow. Okay, well, we built successfully. So our 10 products are still here, right? Still not connected up to the database. So maybe what we'll do is let's just insert manually into the database for now. Let's just maybe create one category and a few products. Then we can replace this fake list with an actual query that fetches products from the database and display it. And then we'll use some cool tools that'll auto-generate a whole bunch of views that we can use to then add, edit, and delete without us having to do any coding. Now, in our database, every product needs a category, so we can't add a product if we have no categories yet. So here's our category table. It's pretty simple. Our category table just has an ID, which is auto-assigned, and a name. So if I just create a new query here, I want to make sure I run it connected to my everything store. What's one category we might want in our store? Okay. So I just want to insert one category and then we can put a couple of products in the books category. So I'll just execute this. It says one row is inserted. I want to highlight that. Okay, so I've got now category ID 1, which is books. We can just go and now quickly insert 2 or 3 books in there, and then we can rewrite our code in our products controller to fetch the actual books. So let's see what columns we have in products. Description. We won't worry about a photo for now. Anybody read a book yesterday? So what are you reading? Frankel? Or at that university, it's on my bookshelf. Whoops. Oh. I think it will work like that. I'll just give it a price. Probably actually easier if I just do it this way. Put in 2 apostrophes. So I'll try and insert this product. Okay, so I've got product ID 1000. And maybe I'll insert 1 more just so we can make sure our looping structure works, that it'll display multiple words. Anybody else read a book yesterday? Of any kind? Sorry? Man in or and? In the High Castle or? Give it a different price. So I'll just insert that as well. You can put in any values you want, doesn't matter. Okay, so we have 2 records in our database. Later on, we might get a chance to look at uploading files so we can go and grab the covers of those books and then upload them. Not today. Photo can be no. So there's all our SQL. Insert a category, insert 2 products. So we've got a products method as well as a view product method. So we want to modify this products method to actually query the product table and get those 2 products and display those instead of these fake ones. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to go to the home controller because that's where this method lives, right? We created a strongly typed list of products and we just made up the names. So first thing we're going to do up here is we're going to make a reference to our database connection class, our DB model. We want to use the database. We're going to say anytime an instance of our controller is instantiated, globally connect to the database. We could do this right within the product method. Right. Whoops, sorry. Thank you. We'll just call it DB. There's our database connection. So create an instance of our database connection anytime we use this class. And it's available in all the methods. So we're going to comment this code out. We're no longer mocking. So we want to use our DB object to actually query the database. Our products equals, here's the awesome thing about using Entity Framework. We don't have to write any more SQL in the applications. db.products, notice there's a get and a set here. This call. This will query the database using the product model. It will get all of the records in the table. And then we pass that data to the view. So instead of working with our pretend data, this actually uses this connection and our product model. Our database connection object has a strongly typed list of product right here. So connect to the database. This method uses the product model to retrieve the entire product. So, and here's where the beauty of Model View Controller comes in. Right? On the front end, we shouldn't have to change anything in the view. Our view expects a list of products. It doesn't care where that list comes from, if we've hard-coded it like last week, or it comes from the database like this week. All the view knows is, hey, I'm getting a list of products that the controller is going to figure out some way, somehow. I don't care how it gets them. My job is just to display that list. So now if we build and refresh, hopefully we get our two books showing up here. Without making any changes at all to the view. Well, we may have to tweak it a little bit. We'll see what happens. So I made no changes, but now the list is coming from my database query. The view is untouched. Again, if we go and look at the HTML in our views, home, products, on the very first line, we are expecting a list of product objects. However the controller wants to create and find that. And then we're rendering them. So last week we looked at displaying the name. But notice now, if I hit dot, all the other properties of my product model are here. So if we also want to display the price, if we want to generate an image tag showing the product image, we have access to all of the columns from the product table now. If we want to display other things, we can. Our page worked without us actually changing one character of the code. Any question here? Okay. This actually gets even easier. So we've got products here. We're now going to use Visual Studio's scaffolding tool. Basically, it's auto code generator. Most of the controllers and views we have to create, we actually don't have to create. Visual Studio will create them for us. And this tool is called scaffolding. So let's look at this. So we manually created a category here, but we actually want to create a set of pages where we can administer the categories. We can view, we can add, we can edit, we can delete. So this is going to be very simple. I'm going to go up to controllers. So I asked you in your lab too, which most of you did, I asked you to manually create a categories controller with a couple of methods. A few people wrote those methods in the home controller. If you put them in the home controller, you lost marks because the instruction said create the categories controller and put your methods in there. So we're going to create a categories controller in our everything store, but we're going to do it in a different way. I'm going to right click controllers, choose add, pick controller. We get 8 options. So you guys probably picked the empty controller in your lab. We're going to pick a different option. We'll use some of these later in the semester. We build an API. We want this one. We don't just want a controller. We want a controller and a set of views that are attached to it. And not only that, these views should be able to do create, read, update, and delete, and list. So I'm just going to click add. So I'm picking that third option, MVC5 controller with views. Click that, click add, and we get this window. Okay, which model does this controller work with? So which model do I want? Well, we've already we could do product, but we're not managing the products with this. Yeah, we want the category. So I'm going to pick my category model. It asks for the data context class. That's our connection object. That's our DB model, because that object points to our database. And then use a layout page. If this is blank, just browse to views shared layout. So all of the views that get built will use our template. And then notice if I pick category as the model, it automatically gives it the name of categories. And notice it's plural, right? By default, your model names should be plural. And the controller names are plural and the model names are singular. So now I click add. And we'll let the scaffold run. So we get a categories controller. It has a reference to our model namespace because it needs the database class and the category class that live inside the model's namespace. We have an instance of our database connection, and we actually have a whole bunch of methods auto-generated. An index method that queries the categories table, passes that list to a view called index. We have a details view for looking up a specific category. We have 2 methods for create, one that will display a blank form and one that processes a form post using our anti-forgery token we talked about last week. We have 2 methods for edit, display the form, process the update, and delete, display the category, and then process a delete. All of this code will actually work without us changing any of it. We've added a new C# file, so we have to build. So build your solution. And notice down here in views, we now have a category subfolder with 5 views: create, delete, details, index, and edit. These views are also fully functional. They're not quite production ready, but they work. So after we build, where do I have to go so we can try this out? Yeah, we just go to the root of the controller. We just categories. This should call that index method. queries the categories table and displays a list. We've written zero code to do this. So remember, if we don't specify any method, index is the default method. We talked about that last week. I haven't specified which method in categories we want to call, so index should run. Slowly, very slowly. I don't know why it's. So there's our index view. It shows us the category we've got. We can edit. We can see a read-only version of it if we want. We've got backlinks. It'll give us a confirmation. If I delete it, we'll remove it. Actually, it'll give us an error if we delete it because we have a product, 2 products that are tied to this category. So we'll have a key constraint error. Or we can add. So what else do we want to sell in the everything store besides books? Let's add another couple of categories. Okay. Something else in the store? Sure. Okay. Let's there we go. So we don't actually need to add any data at all through SQL Server. All we have to do is set up the tables, connect it, the database to the web application with that entity framework wizard, and then start scaffolding the controllers and views. Now we can add, edit, delete all our data, so we can build dashboards to populate databases really fast. So what would we do if we want to, let's say we want to put a link to this so that we can get here. Right now, there's no way to get to this page. Where would we go to do that? Yeah, we just go to the layout file like you had to do in your lab, right? We can open the layout file and add a categories link here that will go to the index view of the categories controller. And then we can come in here. Later on, we'll want to make all this private. Unless you're an administrator of the store, you can't add, edit, and delete the categories, but we're not there yet. Okay, and for assignment 1, you don't need any authentication. So if we go to views, shared, and layout, I can add another action link here. The categories will link to our index method, our list of categories in the category controller. So now I have an easy way to get here. Now the idea of the scaffold is it's a starting place. It basically auto-generates this code. It's not production ready. And if we were building this for somebody, there's certain things that are going to want to change. Like already on this page, what would you want to change? Okay, we'd want to add authentication. Yep. Visually, what else is wrong with it or not ideal? All right. It's kind of small. Yep. Yeah, there's the page title is just the name of the view, which is called index. So maybe we want to change this page title. Let's maybe also format the table so it's going to be a little easier to read. The idea is the scaffold is a starting point, right? It's functional, but we're going to have to customize it. So let's open up our index view and make a couple of quick changes. We'll go to categories index. So our title appears at the top of our browser tab and our heading on the page both say index. That's not very good. Let's say categories. maybe we don't need the details link really. We just need edit and delete. So I'll take out line 28. We don't really need a read-only version of this in here. Right, but we can take out the link. This will eventually be a control panel admin page. So yes, we won't delete view, but yeah, we're just going to take out the link to it. And then here, let's add a couple other Bootstrap classes. If I use table striped, table hover, that'll alternate the background row colors and also give a rollover effect as I move my mouse over. The background highlighting will change to it to clear which record I'm looking at. So I'll maybe add those two classes. See how it looks. Right, so at least we get alternating background colors. Roll over. Right. We might add things like icons instead of the links. We might replace those with buttons. Again, it's a starting point. So we need to think about what is our client, what does the overall look and feel of this need to be? Do we need, instructions on here for people? How does it work? Right? Do we want to add searching, sorting? Scaffolding won't do any of that stuff. It just gives us very basic create, read, update, delete functionality. So for your assignment, this is really everything we did today. That's all I'm really asking you to do for assignment 1. Set up a new project. Well, you all know how to do that because everyone's done a couple labs now. Set up a database and create a couple of tables in it where there's a one-to-many relationship with the foreign key. Make sure each table has a identity primary key. Then in your assignment, use that ADO entity data model to connect your database and your web project. And then you have to create, if you've got 2 tables, use the scaffold to create 2 controllers with views. You can then add, edit, and delete data. And then you should customize them a little bit. Take out the, the titles that aren't very meaningful. Take out links you don't need. Just polish it a little bit in terms of what it looks like. That's all you have to do for assignments. You actually don't really have to write any code at all to do it. Now, there are 2 things, though, for the assignment I do need to show you. 20 minutes, hopefully enough. All of this is local. So I want to show you how do we set this up and then deploy it to an Azure account. So I'm going to log into an Azure account and go through this. I'm going to log into the Azure portal. For the most part, it's fairly simple. There's 1 or 2 gotchas. Wow, they changed the look of it. This look is like 3 years old. They've gone back to this look that's ancient. Okay, so here's how we do it. So I'm going to create a resource. And I want to create both a web application as well as a database. So I think if I click on web, did they move this again? Hang on, just bear with me. I may have to go back. Not sure if this will give me the option. No. I'm going to sign in with a different account here. Excuse me. Okay, this is the new. No, it's not the new portal. Okay. So create a resource. Go away. I'm not sure if I can create. Okay. Oh, they just changed this. Okay, first I'm going to set up my database. Okay. So I'm going to create a resource, click on database, and I'm going to pick an SQL database. So I have to give my database a name, first of all. My Azure subscription. I can either add it to an existing resource group or create a new one. I'll create one called. This part doesn't really matter whether you pick something that's here or create a new one. Just a way of grouping your things. My source is a blank database. So just like we created a blank database locally, I want to create an empty database on Azure. Now I have to create a server. So this step is different when we're working live. So it's going to ask me to create a new server that's going to end with database.windows.net. Okay. So I'm going to call this the Everything Store. And I have to create a username and password here. Please, please, please put your login in a text file on your machine. Because if you forget the credential, you have to log back in and reset it. You can't retrieve it. Okay. So I'll call it TES, Everything Store Database Administrator. Now let's see, call it Winter 2019. Winter 2019. I'll share that credential in case anybody needs to use my copy of the Everything Store database. I don't care if you connect it. Please don't delete it or wipe it out, okay? It's only for you guys. I'm going to say allow Azure to access the server because we need our web application on the Azure web server to be able to talk to the database. Okay? So in fact, I should create a little text file for myself. I always do this. So call TES Azure Access. Always do this for every database I set up. There's my host. The database is called the Everything Store. Username is TES-DBA, and my password is. I'll save that. Then I have the credential because I'm going to need this to connect in Visual Studio. So I'll create my server. And I'll just click Create to build the database. Now there's one other step I have to go through before I can connect to it in Management. So in a minute, I want to connect in Management Studio and run our script again. So the same tables I built on my local server, I now want populated on my Azure database. There's one step I need to do. It's going to chug away and take a minute. By default, when you create a database on Azure, it blocks remote access. Only the Azure services itself can get in. So if I try to connect to it from my machine, once it's set up, it's going to say remote connections are not allowed. So what I need to do is open the firewall that Microsoft puts around the database to allow my laptop to connect to it. You don't do this, you can't connect to it from within Visual Studio. So if I go and look at my list of resources here, okay, so here's my Everything database. So I'm going to go into it, and here's the important part of where to do this. Okay. So I'm going to try to connect through Management Studio, and you're going to see it's going to block me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and try and add my connection here. So if I go up to my list of servers, where it says local groups, I'll say new server registration. I'm going to enter all my credentials and try and connect. So my server name is Everything Store database. If this is useful, you have it in your text file. There's all my credentials. My authentication is SQL Server. I want to remember the password, so it doesn't prompt me again. And notice it doesn't ask me anywhere about the database name. That's actually in this tab under connection properties. What database do I want? I want the everything store, so I'm going to test my connection. It can't open the server from this IP address. Not that the login is invalid, the login's correct, I just don't have access. To enable, use the Azure Portal to set a firewall rule to allow your IP address in. So I could set it to allow my current IP, but that means if I go home or I go and work in a coffee shop later, I'm locked out. So the easiest thing, I'm going to open the firewall to any IP, as long as it has the correct username and password. So no matter where I am, I can get in. So I'll click OK. And now if I go here to show my firewall settings, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new rule, which I'll just call all. So you give your rule a name. I'm allowing any IP before at all. And no matter where I am, my IP has access so long as I have the right username and password. I'm not restricting based on IP address. Later on, when our app is in production, we might want to restrict it. For now, so you'll need to do this in the database you set up. If I click Add Client IP, that will add my current IP address to the college. But I'm locked out as soon as I leave the college and try to connect again. So I'm going to add this rule and allow all the IPs. And I'll just save this rule. Okay, so now it won't restrict me based on my IP address anymore. So now if I go back here and try to test it again, I'm good. Right, so you can see the difference adding that firewall rule made. I was locked out until I did it. So. Okay. Do you have an option to create? So that's when you tried to create a database directly. Do you have an option in there that says web app plus SQL? Look for that option, because it may allow you to create that option where it will create the web application and the database together. They used to have that option. They did last semester. I'm not sure that it's there. Web app plus SQL. Have a look for that. I'll come back to you in just a second. So now I'm going to save this connection. And because I picked remember password, it won't ask for the password again. So now I'm connected here. And if I double click, it'll connect me in my Object Explorer. So here, I can close this. So here's my empty everything store database on Azure. When I go into tables, there'll be nothing here, right? I only have the tables locally. I don't have them in Azure. So I'm just going to go back to my query. I can open it up again, or I'll just copy everything from make a new query. On my Azure version of the everything store, I'm just going to rerun the same create query. Or I could just go in, right-click tables, and use the visual table designer. So in your assignment, you don't have to write a query. You can just use that visual designer to build your tables. So I'll just execute it. So I'm going to refresh my list of tables and the tables in our script. That's interesting. Not sure why my connection timed out. Okay, so now I've got my tables from my script. So I have a copy, a duplicate on Azure minus the data, right? We added the categories locally. We added a books. We added 3 categories. We added 2 products. So I have those on my local machine. The Azure database is blank. I just built my empty tables. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to my web.config. I'm just going to change this one to local for now. Now I want to reconnect to my Azure database. You won't have a local connection for your assignment. So in this case, basically when you go through that wizard setting up the data model, instead of picking your local server, you'll put in the name to the Azure server. You'll pick SQL Server Authentication, put in your username and password, and you'll browse the tables from your Azure database instead of your local one. And you'll name it default connection. So I'm going to just do that. You can actually get the connection string from the Azure Portal. If I go back here and go to my overview, I've changed this around a little bit. Bear with me for a second. So if I click on the database itself, I can choose show connection strings. And here's my ADO.NET connection string. Now you won't need to copy and paste it because you can just use the wizard to generate it. I'm just going to copy that. Paste it in. So now I'll put in my username and password. Temporarily remitting my local one, so now my site should actually use Azure. So if I go back and refresh my categories page, it should be empty because it's now going to talk to my Azure database instead of my local database. I shouldn't need to rebuild because I just changed the web.config file, but I will. So if I refresh now, I should have no data. It connects successfully to Azure. There are no categories and there are no products in that database. Whoops. Whoops, I missed this property, which is what type of database is it? I still need that it's SQL Server. So I tried to connect, but I didn't provide the type of database. So now we want the web application running locally, but it's using the database on Azure. So the easiest thing is probably just create the database on Azure from the beginning. So we should get an empty category page. And if I click on products, that list should be empty as well. And then the last thing we'll want to do is look at deploying the web application. Okay. So we have no categories. We have no products. So now I can go and start populating my Azure database if I want. Right, so we've got a books category. What else do we have? Watches. and mobile phones. Now my application's talking to Azure instead of locally. So the last thing I want to do is we've got the database running now. How do we get the web application up on Azure? Basically, we want to push our application to GitHub and create a web application on Azure that talks to our GitHub repository. It will sync automatically every 60 seconds with Azure's continuous deployment. So I've set up the database. I now want to set up one more thing. Giselle, I haven't forgotten about it yet, but I just want to go through this while time allows. I'm going to create a web application. So it's going to be a subdomain of azurewebsites.net. I'll just call it the Everything Store. I'll use my existing Everything Store, so the database and web are bundled together in terms of the resources. I don't need any of this other stuff. All I need to do is give it a name and click create, and then it will allow me to connect the Git repository here. So it'll just take a minute. It's going to set up a blank website first, and then we want to tie it to GitHub. So what I'm going to do is connect it. I haven't put any of my code from today on GitHub. So what I'm going to do is connect it to my current version of GitHub. We can see that it will load, and then I'll update my GitHub repository with all of today's changes, and we should see that the website then gets updated automatically without us having to push to Azure. So that's just running. I'll just go back to my, okay, so I'll go to my resources. Here's our website. So if I go here, I'm basically just going to get a home page with nothing on it. Right? So how do we connect this to GitHub? If we go into Deployment Center, under Deployment, where's the code from? Pick GitHub. Now, I've already authorized my GitHub account. It shows my GitHub username. You won't see this yet. When you click GitHub, it'll prompt you to log into your GitHub account and say, do you authorize Azure to access your Git credentials? And GitHub will also send you an email making sure you're okay with that. So I'll just click continue. I'll pick this first option, this Kudu service, and continue. So I'll pick my GitHub username. It's already authenticated me with GitHub. It's going to go search for my repositories. They're in alphabetical order. Here's the Everything Store. What branch do I want? I only have a master branch. And I'll finish. And it's going to try to connect to that repository and sync a copy of the code. So if this works, in a minute I can refresh, and we should get last week's version of the Everything Store with our 10 products and no categories. So it shows our last commit message. So it shows the versions in the Azure portal. We can see which commit is actually active. And if we make a new commit and it breaks things, we can roll back to an earlier one from here. Oh crap, we just crashed the site. Go and click on an earlier version and bring that one back up. So we have this rollback feature. Okay. So now I'll refresh. It should load the site as we started. If not, I'll have to figure out why. I realize we are about out of time. If this doesn't run today, I will film a little video showing whatever else I had to do here. Let's see. Okay, so here was our store as of last week. It just wasn't finished syncing. So here's our products. It's going to give us 10 fake products, right? This last week's version didn't use the database. So there's our 10 products. So what happens now? How do I get changes on here? All I have to do is make a new commit to GitHub. So I'll just do that quickly. And GitHub, so I'll go to my Team Explorer and go to Changes. And less than 4. I'm going to commit and push my changes to GitHub, which should just take a minute to sync. As soon as this is done, Azure, it checks that repository every 60 seconds for changes. And as soon as it finds a new commit in that branch, it's going to resync the code. So we've pushed to GitHub. Let's see what happens here. So now, look, it's already found, and it's running when it's already done. By the time I could even get back here, it synced my new copy. And now if I refresh, my update should be here with our current version that's using the SQL Server. And it's going to be slow after it does a new commit. So if this version breaks, I can just click on this version and go back to it. So now notice our products, our list is empty because we have no products in my Azure database. Categories is now here. So we no longer need FTP. We don't have to worry about transferring files and forgetting any. We make a new commit to GitHub, and Azure is automatically going to grab all those changes for us. So this accomplishes two things. It lets us use version control and back up our code to GitHub, and at the same time, keep our web application up to date automatically. Can you create anything or still no? Okay. If you don't have that ability, let's scroll down to the cost management and billing down near the bottom left, and we can have a look at your subscription. We click on cost management and go to subscription. It may show us what credits you have. Right, to check your remaining credit. Does your subscription name say Azure for Students? Okay. The problem is the starter account doesn't give you access to create SQL Server databases. We need the Azure for Students subscription. That one includes SQL Server. Yeah, okay, so you set yours up. They keep changing the name. You need Azure for Students, which is not the Azure for Students starter. Starter doesn't include SQL Server. It's this one. I can post this link. Start building, get a $100 credit, and activate. So we need this account. So try to sign up for this one. You may need to use the help link to contact Microsoft and say, can you, I've signed up for this subscription. I need SQL Server for my class. But I can't enable it. But this is the product you need to sign up for. There's actually, there's actually a code in the Imagine store for this. You can also look in the Imagine store and you can buy for free the Azure for Students. That'll give you a license code. So you can look in there. The absolute worst case scenario, if you don't have access, create it all locally, but then you'll have to back up and send me your database along with your submission. Because if it's not running on Azure, I don't have your database. So email me, and if you need that process, I'll post it.
typically of C#, or we can see that on Java?
No, that's kind of C# syntax.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, you'll probably see this fucking structure in C#.
Okay. There is another class in here, so if we can pack up and let them get that. Have a good rest of your week. Remember, Simon's joint Tuesday. Hey, Rich, how are you? For Mr. Yeah, 2 months backwards. We got his keys, we got a lot of the things. It was here, during the tutorial. And then